What is the best Generation 5 Pokemon? This is a really interesting question because I think that there's 3 Pokemon that are all vying for the title. And I hate to say it because I know it's cliche, but number 1 will shock you. Overall, the Pokemon on this list are incredibly strong. I had to leave off really good Pokemon, including some of my favorites that just like were good Pokemon, but aren't good enough compared to the other Pokemon on this list. So let's kick things off by talking about Excadrill. That's right, Excadrill is number 10, so that should give you an idea of how good the Pokemon from this generation are. Excadrill is a ground and steel type Pokemon that has never won the World Championships, though it has won at least one national level event. The main thing that you need to know about Excadrill is that it's an offensive steel type Pokemon, which is unusual since normally steel types tend to be a bit more defensive, and it has the ability Sand Rush. Sand Rush is a really great ability. It's the Sandstorm equivalent of abilities like Chlorophyll and Swift Swim, which double the Pokemon's speed in the correct weather, in this case Sandstorm. This makes Excadrill really good because now it can not only outspeed pretty much every Pokemon in the game, but it also does a lot of damage. Excadrill was normally paired with Tyranitar since Tyranitar is the best sand setter in the game, but it's nice because even though Excadrill and Tyranitar share some weaknesses, they don't overlap their typings at all, and so you're able to kind of use them to do different things. Excadrill was considered to be a strong option during Black and White when it first released, especially once Tyranitar became legal in competitive play. It then saw a ton of success during the X and Y Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire era, where the addition of Mega Evolutions, especially Mega Salamence, who has really great synergy with Excadrill. It was a key member of one of the main archetypes, which is this archetype called Japan Sand, which was just a really balanced team built around Tyranitar, Excadrill, Mega Salamence, and a couple other key threats. And then in 2020, Excadrill became very good for, I would say, a slightly different reason. That's because at the beginning of Sword and Shield, Excadrill is one of the strongest Dynamax attackers because of the secondary effects of its strongest max moves. Basically, if you missed Sword and Shield, what you need to know is that Dynamax was a once per battle mechanic that lasted for 3 turns or until the Pokemon was either KO'd or switched out, and it powered up all of a Pokemon's moves, not only making them stronger for the most part, but also giving them a new secondary effect. Excadrill is a ground and steel type, and if it used the ground and steel max moves, it would raise Excadrill's team's special defense and defense stats respectively. The ground and steel type max moves were typically considered to be some of the strongest in the game because not only were you doing absurd damage, but you were also reducing the amount of damage that you would go on to take. Pairing Excadrill with scary support Pokemon, most notably Togekiss, who could keep it safe with Follow Me, but also like it was immune to Earthquake if you ever were like not in Dynamax and you wanted to hit both targets, formed the core of a lot of really strong teams. And yeah, like Excadrill could also be paired with Tyranitar if you wanted the speed boost, though you didn't have to because you did have this other support. Pokemon have been getting stronger and stronger over the years, so nowadays Excadrill has a bit more trouble keeping up, but I think it could do well again in the future if the power levels ever lower again, especially right after a new game releases. Okay, coming in at number 9 is the last Pokemon on our list to have never won the World Championships. It's Volcarona, coming in at number 9. Volcarona is an exceptionally good Pokemon. It's a fire and bug type Pokemon with great stats and a really scary move pool. What makes Volcarona so interesting in my opinion is that unlike Excadrill, who pretty much just worked as this like sweeper who was intended to do damage, Volcarona instead has had 2 different ways of being used that have had success depending on the format around it. The one that I tend to think of when I think of Volcarona is as a setup sweeper. It gets this move called Quiver Dance, which is arguably one of the strongest moves in the game. Quiver Dance boosts Volcarona's stats, but whereas other setup moves either boost 1 stat by 2 stages or 2 stats by 1 stage, Quiver Dance boosts 3 stats by 1 stage. Its speed, its special attack, and special defense. That's a big deal because it makes Volcarona faster, harder to get rid of, and allows it to do more damage. This Volcarona set was extremely popular during Black and White, often supported by Hitmontop. We actually had a name for the duo. It was called Top Moth, because Hitmontop's Intimidate ability lowers the physical attack stat of the opponent, and Quiver Dance raises Volcarona's special defense. Hitmontop could also use Fake Out to help get a Quiver Dance up without being as threatened. It could use Feint to break through Protect to let Volcarona KO things, and it could block Volcarona's biggest weakness, rock moves, most notably Rock Slide, with the move Wide Guard. Bug and Fire typing is interesting. It's certainly not bad, especially considering that like Bug is not a very good type, to put it nicely, but it does have a couple key weaknesses, most notably the fact that both types are weak to rock, and water type moves are always pretty common as well. Plus you have to watch out for flying moves in a lot of formats too. The other Volcarona set is probably not what you'd expect if you only know about Volcarona as this like setup sweeper Pokemon. It instead allows Volcarona to fill a more supporting role. Volcarona gets the move Rage Powder, which forces all opponents' Pokemon to target the user, basically letting it protect more important teammates and sponge attacks. Volcarona's natural bulk is actually totally respectable, and so if you train it not to be offensive but instead to take hits, it can stick around a lot longer than you'd expect. Volcarona is also a really scary user of Rage Powder because of its ability Flame Body, which has a chance to burn any Pokemon that makes contact with it. This is a big deal because physical Pokemon, if they get burnt, have their attack stat cut in half. And so when you're trying to hit Volcarona's partner and then you end up hitting Volcarona instead and then it burns you, like, it's like not the same as knocking out the Pokemon, but it can kind of function in a similar way where the Pokemon's like actual threat level is just so much lower. This is especially scary for Pokemon that hit multiple times like Mega Kangaskhan and Urshifu Rapid Strike. Even when it's not using Rage Powder, Volcarona can do some other scary things as well. It can also burn the opponent by just using the move Will-O-Wisp, not even needing to rely on Flame Body. It can use the move Struggle Bug to weaken special attackers. It can use Whirlwind to get rid of setup Pokemon. This was used occasionally to try and stop Xerneas, one of the strongest setup Pokemon of all time. And there's a couple other things Volcarona can do as well. Volcarona has been kind of a consistent presence throughout the years. It won 2 nationals in 2013, and I would say in pretty much every other format it was used at least a little bit. Most recently, it's actually had a pretty decent resurgence during Scarlet and Violet because it benefits so much from terrestrialization. I would say that the main set being used right now is that Quiver Dance Sweeper, but Scarlet and Violet adding terrestrialization gives Volcarona a much needed new tool. Whereas in the past, its defensive typing could be kind of a liability. Now, Volcarona is able to use mostly its Terra Grass to not only resist the water type moves, get a resistance to electric and ground as well, which is pretty useful, but it also gives it a damage boost on its Giga Drain attack, which it wouldn't always run in the past because it was like just so much weaker than using a bug move in that slot. But now, Volcarona can use Terra Grass, get a damage boost on Giga Drain, resist water type moves, and get a ton of healing from Giga Drain. Comboing this with like the leftovers item or the citrus berry item, and it makes it very difficult to remove Volcarona. I'm recording this video prior to the World Championships. I think that Volcarona could have a really deep run this year. It's always a threat. Maybe this will be the year where it gets its first world win. Okay, so every single Pokemon remaining on our list has won the World Championships at least once. But before we talk about our number 8 slot, let's talk about another world champion, me. You should subscribe. It helps the channel out. It helps us get data about which videos people like and which videos people don't like. And if you like this content, it makes it more likely for you to be notified when I post in the future. It's every Saturday, by the way, 11 a.m. Eastern. Anyway, let's talk about the number 8 slot, which is a Pokemon who I really love, Conkeldurr. For a long time, Conkeldurr was considered to be one of the best fighting type Pokemon, period. It's a pure fighting type Pokemon with really respectable bulk and a really high attack stat, allowing it to do damage. If that were it, Conkeldurr probably wouldn't have had as much usage as it did, but the thing is that Conkeldurr actually gets 2 really useful abilities. The first one is Guts, which gives Conkeldurr a whopping 50% attack boost if it's affected by a status condition. Because of this, players would use the Flame Orb item to burn Conkeldurr and then, yeah, just like reap the benefits. If you have the ability Guts, you aren't affected by the attack having nature of burn. The other way that players like to use Conkeldurr was with the Iron Fist ability. This ability powers up certain punching moves by, I think it's 20%. I checked, it is 20%. And although that's not as big as the 50% increase from burn, the thing is that it also doesn't take your item. And because other players wouldn't know what your ability was, at least not at first, they would be afraid to give Conkeldurr a status condition. When I first started playing, Guts was the dominant set, especially because Iron Fist hadn't yet been released. Conkeldurr was one of the strongest Pokemon in the format because that was a year where like fighting type Pokemon are just really strong across the board because there was a lot of Pokemon that were weak to fighting types. And also, not only was Conkeldurr really naturally tanky, making it difficult to remove, but it also worked as this kind of like drain tank where players would damage it and you would lose some health to the burn, but it would often use the move Drain Punch, which isn't normally thought to be that strong of a move, but when it's being powered up by Guts, it actually starts hitting really hard. And then Drain Punch heals you for part of the damage that you deal. And so sometimes you would get Conkeldurr low, it would like Drain Punch a key threat, and all of a sudden it'd be completely back to full HP. Conkeldurr was often used in Trick Room as a Trick Room sweeper where slow Pokemon move before fast ones, but it wasn't necessary to be used in Trick Room. And that's partially because it also gets the move Mach Punch, which is a priority move that moves before other Pokemon attack. And because Mach Punch was also being powered up by either Guts or Iron Fist, it meant that Conkeldurr was able to still like output a lot of damage, or at least finish off middling to low HP Pokemon, even if Trick Room wasn't up. Conkeldurr also would use the move Facade, which is a move that doubles in power if the Pokemon is affected by a status condition, so it has really nice synergy with Guts. So if you didn't want to Drain Punch for whatever reason, you also had that option, which was also good against the flying type Pokemon, which were very common in the first year of Black and White's competitive format. I won my first ever regional and national tournament with Conkeldurr. I didn't use the Gut set, I actually relied more on a defensive Conkeldurr, but it's not a Pokemon that only had success in its first year. Conkeldurr was one of the main offensive threats in 2011, that's true, but it was also one of the main Pokemon in 2013 as well, the final year of Black and White, and actually in both 2011 and 2013, it won the World Championships. Conkeldurr had a resurgence in 2015 as a primary offensive threat when fighting type Pokemon were once again good, and then it kind of fell off for a little bit, and we thought, oh, there's power creep, like Incineroar's in the game now, like there's Intimidate, like I guess it's not good anymore. And then it became one of the main threats in 2020, actually going so far as to win an international level event. Frankly, Conkeldurr has a really impressive resume, winning Worlds twice and being good in 3 different generations. That being said, it has been affected by power creep in a pretty big way. Geo, can we show a comparison of Conkeldurr's stats to Iron Hands' stats, please? So this should be apparent how bad power creep has got because, yeah, Conkeldurr is one of the best Pokemon of all time, and it's almost across the board, just strictly worse than Iron Hands, which is a Pokemon that has a better move pool with Fake Out, one of the best moves like in the game, and also has a very useful secondary typing that like adds multiple resistances with only adding 1 weakness and gives you a second offensive type so that, yeah, like you can hit flying types even easier than Conkeldurr can. So yeah, I think it might be a little bit until Conkeldurr becomes good again. I think it would have to be in a format where Pokemon like Iron Hands and honestly maybe even Incineroar are not around, but it does have a lot going for it, and it has historically been a really strong Pokemon, so it's still making it this high up on the list. Okay, coming in at number 7 is Whimsicott. I feel like I've talked a little bit about Whimsicott at this point because I've done the best grass type video. Whimsicott's the first Pokemon on our list that is purely a support Pokemon. It's a grass and fairy type Pokemon with frankly really bad stats. It is fast, but everything else leaves a lot to be desired. The thing is, what makes Whimsicott so useful is its ability, Prankster. Prankster gives any move that doesn't do damage an increased stage of priority, and that's really useful, especially when used with the move Tailwind. Tailwind doubles the speeds of your Pokemon for the next 4 turns, and in modern competitive Pokemon, that change activates mid-turn, like right away. So Tailwind's even more threatening when used by a Prankster Pokemon because it allows your partner to reap the benefit right away compared to like waiting until the next turn, which can often happen if you're using a slower Pokemon. Whimsicott has a lot of other useful moves that also benefit from Prankster though. Encore is probably the most famous one, forcing whatever you hit with it to keep using the same move that they just used over and over again. But it also can weaken the opponent with Fake Tears, it can support its team with Light Screen, it can lower the opponent's stats with like Charm or Tickle. Actually, that's a pretty good segue into the fact that Whimsicott won the World Championships, and it did it using Z moves. Z moves were like a supercharged version of a regular move, and Whimsicott had the Normalium Z Crystal with the move Nature Power, which would transform into a different type of move. Like it would either turn into Thunderbolt or Moonblast if the electric or misty terrain was up. And the team had both Tapu Koko to set electric terrain and Tapu Fini to set misty terrain. And so it allowed Whimsicott to use either the Electrium Z or the Fairyum Z attack while holding the Normalium Z. It's a really niche interaction, but it's also relevant because that Nature Power move, even though it turns into Thunderbolt or Moonblast, in its base form, it doesn't do any damage before it transforms. And so Whimsicott was able to use it with an increased stage of priority, which is very terrifying because those moves were very, very powerful. On top of winning the World Championships, Whimsicott's won at least 1 international, and most recently it won a regional championship at the beginning of the current format. At the time I'm recording this, we're in the middle of a format where Pokemon like Miraidon and Raging Bolt are really popular, and for that reason, Whimsicott is actually the main Tailwind setter in the format. Whimsicott's Fairy typing is really nice because it makes it immune to Dragon type Pokemon, and as a Grass type, it also resists valuable moves like Water moves, Ground moves, and currently electric type moves are really valuable. Also, I mentioned how Whimsicott's stats are pretty bad, but normally it will either use the Focus Sash item to help it survive 1 strong attack, or it'll train itself to be much bulkier and rely on its high natural speed to allow it to invest fewer points in speed and more in its bulk to help it keep itself alive. And even though its offensive stats are like, well, they're not very good, Moonblast is such a strong attack, and it also has the added benefit of having a really high chance of dropping whatever it hits special attack stat that even though Whimsicott, like you're not putting on your team to do damage, if you ignore it, it can really be disruptive and actually can threaten Pokemon for respectable damage. And if it's hitting something for super effective, it will do more than you would like it to. I have a character flaw. I always forget to cancel my subscriptions. Like I'm pretty sure that I have 3 Nintendo Online memberships when I only need 2. Thankfully, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. I'm using Rocket Money to make sure that I cancel all of my unnecessary subscriptions so that I can save money and have a socially acceptable number of Nintendo Online accounts. I'm also using Rocket Money to set myself budgets so that all my monthly income doesn't disappear into a suspiciously Pokemon plushie shaped hole. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when they use all of its features, with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. You can also unlock even more features with Premium. Go to rocketmoney.com/Wolfey or click the link in the description to get started for free. Thanks again to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. That brings us to number 6, Hydreigon. I actually know for a fact that the official pronunciation is Hydreigon. I'm not going to tell you why, but I did have to learn the official pronunciation of Hydreigon. Maybe at some point you'll figure out why. Anyway, Hydreigon. Hydreigon is a dark and dragon type Pokemon that has won the world championships twice. Just like Conkeldurr, there are 2 Pokemon in the bottom 5 half of our list that have won the world championships twice. That's how good some of the Pokemon from Gen 5 are. Did I already say this? It's a dark and dragon type Pokemon, which was really good until they introduced fairy type Pokemon. While it isn't as fast as a lot of the other dragon type Pokemon like Garchomp, Latios, and Salamence, it hits really hard and it's got pretty decent natural bulk. That's true of some of the other dragons as well. But the dark secondary typing is really threatening, as is the fact that Hydreigon learns a lot of really valuable coverage moves, most notably fire and ground type attacks, that it can use to hit the steel type Pokemon that resist its dragon type moves. Dragon and Dark also gives you a lot of useful resistances, like Dragon resisting fire, water, grass, and electric are all relevant, and Dark being one of the only types in the game that resists Ghost and Dark, both of which are kind of hard to get. Plus it has 2 immunities thanks to Dark being immune to Psychic and its Levitate ability making it immune to ground. In other words, if you have the wrong Pokemon on the field versus Hydreigon, you have a Pokemon with great coverage that hits really hard, that resists tons of different moves and has good natural stats, and that'll often result in you losing a damage trade. Not to mention that Draco Meteor is just such a strong move, especially pre-fairy Pokemon. Hydreigon was one of the strongest Pokemon in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. And even though it's fallen off a bit in recent years as we've gotten more and more strong fairy Pokemon, it was used a little bit at the beginning of Sword and Shield and a decent bit at the start of Scarlet and Violet, especially because Terrestrialization allows it to overcome its weakness to fairy type Pokemon. Hydreigon won the world championships in both 2011 and 2012, and it's won 5 different national level events as well as many regional events. I actually used Hydreigon to win my first ever event, the Washington, D.C. Regional Championships, all the way back in 2011. And I've used it a couple other times throughout the years. It actually helped me qualify for the World Championships in 2014 after I had to go through the last chance qualifier after I missed qualifying the usual way. It's a really strong Pokemon, and even though it hasn't been doing as well in recent years, I definitely think that it could make a resurgence in the future. Now, I should warn you that the number 5 Pokemon on our list is going to be a little bit surprising, I think, compared to Hydreigon. I mean, Hydreigon is like thought to be one of the strongest Pokemon ever, and I don't think that's true for our number 5 slot. But I went through all of the results and I did a lot of thinking, and actually the number 5 slot is a little bit undervalued, I think, relative to how well it's performed. The number 5 Pokemon on my list is Gothitelle. Gothitelle is a pure psychic type Pokemon that on paper looks a little bit underwhelming compared to Hydreigon. It has good stats, it's respectably bulky, but it's not like insanely broken or anything when it comes to the stats department. And as a pure psychic type, like, it's not that good of a typing. And actually in recent years, it's actually, I would say, a pretty mediocre typing. Like, how is Gothitelle on here? Well, Gothitelle's also won the world championships twice, and it won 5 different regional championships last year alone. The thing about Gothitelle is that it has one of the most broken abilities in all of competitive Pokemon, Shadow Tag. Shadow Tag stops both your opponent's Pokemon from switching out, whereas you are still allowed to switch out. It is ridiculous. It is not balanced. It is extremely strong. It basically enables both really powerful offensive and defensive positions where you can trap a Pokemon on the field when it's stuck, like not actually contributing anything, and kind of play a 2 versus 1. It can also be paired with really strong offensive Pokemon to trap poor Pokemon on the field that can't switch out and also can't survive a hit and just eliminate them right away. Here's a fun fact. I told you that Gothitelle won Worlds twice, and that's true. I didn't lie. But Gothitelle won Worlds in 2014 when it was paired on the infamous Pachirisu team, but it also won Worlds in 2011. Gothitelle won the World Championships without Shadow Tag. Huh? No Shadow Tag? And this is just like a pure Psychic type Pokemon? Like, and it didn't even have access to another buff that it received recently, which I'll talk about in a second. It was like just the most basic form of Gothitelle, and it won the World Championships. let's talk about that buff. Going into Sword and Shield, Gothitelle got access to the move Fake Out, another move that I mentioned earlier, as being one of the strongest moves in the game. This wasn't so impactful during Sword and Shield because Dynamax Pokemon couldn't be flinched, and so Fake Out, you know, that the whole thing was at a flinch, so Gothitelle like wasn't as good. But in Scarlet and Violet, Gothitelle having access to Fake Out now was a really big deal. I think I was the first one to kind of break the seal on Gothitelle and use it to win regionals. I made a video on this if you're interested. And ever since then, Gothitelle usage just took off. So we talked about the first year of Black and White, the first year X and Y, and also like last year, the first year of Scarlet and Violet. But I don't want to give you all the wrong idea. Gothitelle also won 5 different regional championships in the second year of Sun and Moon. And I won a regional with it in 2015 on my first Perish Trap team as well. So it has literally been good in every generation, and the generations where it didn't win the world championships, it won 5 different regional championships. The exception being Sword and Shield, but also all of our events were canceled, so it's like a little bit hard to say there. So it has literally been good at some point during every single generation. And that's part of the reason why I felt it was fair to put it above Hydreigon. Even though at its peak, Hydreigon was used a fair bit more than Gothitelle, the peaks of Gothitelle are just ridiculous. And the consistency and the amount of wins relative to the usage that it's had is like very, very, very surprising. Okay, now we're into the big dogs. Every single Pokemon that I haven't talked about yet that's on our list is a Pokemon that some of you probably clicked on this video thinking was the #1 best Pokemon in all of Generation 5. Differentiating between them was difficult. I feel good about the job that I've done, but if you don't agree, you can let me know in the comments. I do read all of them. Please be nice. So let's start off by talking about our #4 slot, Tornadus. Tornadus is a pure flying type Pokemon that's a member of the legendary Genie trio. It's only won the World Championships 1 time, which is part of the reason why I have it lower than the other Pokemon on our list. We talked earlier about how strong Whimsicott was because of the combination of Prankster and Tailwind. Tornadus also has Prankster plus Tailwind, and to be clear, Tornadus is the strongest Tailwind setter in history. Let's compare Tornadus' stats to Whimsicott's. Whimsicott is 5 points faster, but in pretty much every other dimension, Tornadus is just strictly better, especially when you look at its special attack stat, which is much higher than Whimsicott's. And just like Whimsicott, Tornadus can be either offensive or defensive. I recently won a regional using Focus Sash offensive Tornadus with just like max speed, mostly max special attack, just trying to, you know, have it be fast, hit as hard as possible instead of Tailwind. But other players have had success really making Tornadus very bulky, giving it a defensive item like Rocky Helmet or Covert Cloak, or maybe even Citrus Berry, and basically foregoing both its speed and its special attack in favor of training it to be a lot tankier and having it stick around a lot longer. One of the things that's craziest about Tornadus is that they recently buffed it in Scarlet and Violet. They gave it a signature move that it did not need called Bleakwind Storm, which is just absurd. It's a powerful flying type attack that hits both opponents and has a chance to drop their speed. And the only downside is that it can miss, except if the rain is up, then it never misses. And Tornadus is really great at setting the weather up because it does get access to the weather controlling moves. Like most often it's going to be Rain Dance or Sunny Day. Rain Dance to power up a partner Pokemon or potentially to shut down sun-based teams. And then Sunny Day, kind of the same thing. It's either you're trying to weaken water type Pokemon or you're trying to power up a fire type. But Rain Dance has such great synergy with Tornadus because even if you weren't powering up Bleakwind, like if you're playing before Bleakwind Storm was in the game, it could still use Hurricane, which is even stronger, only hits one target, might confuse, and never misses in the rain. That's part of the reason why Tornadus has been used a lot with Kyogre, because they have incredible synergy together. Tornadus can hit the grass type Pokemon that resist Kyogre's water type moves. Tornadus can set the Tailwind up, so Kyogre is able to use Water Spout, which is a move that does more damage the higher its HP is, and so making it move before other Pokemon so it can Water Spout before it takes damage is a really big deal. And Kyogre sets up the rain so that Tornadus doesn't have to worry about missing its Hurricanes. I've talked about Rain Dance, but Rain Dance doesn't work when you consider Primal Weather like Primal Kyogre, Primal Groudon, and even Delta Stream from Mega Rayquaza. But Tornadus was still able to reset the weather if it used the move Role Play, which copies the ability of whatever it targets. And so Tornadus could use Role Play and end up with Primordial Sea to reset the weather if Groudon or Mega Rayquaza ever turned it off. Tornadus is a Pokemon that has really withstood the test of time. And even though it's a Pokemon that's only won the World Championships once, I think the more accurate thing would be to say that it's only won the World Championships once so far. Okay, before we talk about our top 3, let's do some honorable mentions. There were a lot of Pokemon that I really love that I had to leave off, and just a lot of Pokemon that have had success, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly and just mention some of them. Ferrothorn, that's a Pokemon that I always thought of as really good, but yeah, like there's too many Pokemon, so I couldn't include it. It's like a really bulky, tanky Pokemon that uses Leech Seed to whittle away at opponent's health with its Iron Barb's ability. Really cool Pokemon, really scary, really threatening. Didn't have as much success as the other Pokemon. Crocodile actually got second at the World Championships in 2011 and won in 2017. So I thought about including it here. It does tend to be kind of more niche and better when the power level is lower. And yeah, now that we have Intimidate Incineroar, it'll probably never be good while that's around, but yeah, like it did have some pretty good success. Terrakion was the Pokemon that I most wanted to include, but I ended up leaving off. That was like the number 11 slot. It's been very, very good. It was especially great at the beginning of Black and White and throughout X and Y, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, though it hasn't done as well in recent years. It is a world champion. I did have to leave it off. Escavalier probably wasn't going to make it on this list, but it is a world champion, so I like kind of wanted to include it. But yeah, it's like a really, really slow and powerful Trick Room attacker that won the World Championships in 2011. So yeah, like I thought about including it. Chandelure was one of the best Pokemon in 2011. I actually won the national tournament or championships with it in 2012 as well. I forgot about that. And it recently had a resurgence on Zamazenta teams. It's a really cool Pokemon. It's pretty frail, but it does hit really hard. Well, it used to hit really hard back when Pokemon actually had reasonable stats. Fire Ghost typing is cool. It's immune to fire type moves with its ability. It was good on and off for a couple of years. I like it a lot. Reuniclus is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. I used it on my first ever team that I built. I brought it to every tournament in the first year, and it's had a couple other moments of success as well. Like I think it almost top cut the World Championships in 2015. It's an offensive psychic type Pokemon that uses the Magic Guard ability to negate the recoil damage from Life Orb while still keeping the benefit, and so it's able to hit really hard. It's also pretty tanky. It sets Trick Room up. It was one of the key Pokemon on my first team, so I really love it. Speaking of that first team, let's talk about Cofagrigus, who should not be on this list, but I like it a lot, so I'm going to mention it. Cofagrigus really only saw success within 2011. It has a really cool ability called Mummy, where if anything like makes contact with it, they lose their ability and it gets replaced by Mummy. So you could end up in a situation where all 4 Pokemon had Mummy on the team, which is cool. It doesn't really have the stats to keep up in a higher power level format, but I did bring it to almost every single game of my first year playing competitive Pokemon, so I really love it. Scrafty is another Pokemon I wanted to include, but decided to leave off. It was really good before, well, Incineroar got added to the game. Fighting and Dark type, Intimidate, Fake Out, doesn't have U-Turn or Parting Shot, but is a really fun Pokemon with good stats. It could do damage with like Drain Punch, and Crunch was actually pretty decent. It had Knockoff at one point. Could use Super Fang. Really good move pool, actually. I used to bring Scrafty to like everything. It was like kind of like a signature Pokemon for a while, but yeah, I can't really keep up anymore. I also wanted to mention Emboar here because it's only ever been used once by me. Well, I guess twice by me, technically, because I won a regional with it, and then I got top 8 at Worlds in 2011. Not a good Pokemon. Not very popular, never really used outside of when I used it, but I like it, so I wanted to mention it here. And then I guess the last Pokemon I'll mention is Jellicent. Jellicent was another Pokemon I wanted to include. It won the first regional of Sword and Shield when used by Aaron Trailer. It also like was really good in 2011. It's a cool bulky ghost water type that could be more offensive with like Water Spout. It could also be more defensive with like Trick Room, Strength Sap, Will-O-Wisp. It's a really cool Pokemon. It's one of my favorites. It's really fun to use. It's really like fair in a way that not all Pokemon feel. Yeah, like it didn't have the results to justify making it onto this list. Okay, now we're into the top 3. The Pokemon that I think any one of these you could argue is the best Generation 5 Pokemon ever. Number 3 will shock you, and I'm confident that a lot of you are going to be, you know, doing the like surprise Pikachu face when you hear this. I think that the number 3 best Generation 5 Pokemon is Landorus. Before you pull out the pitchforks and start writing angry comments, hear me out. Landorus has only won the World Championships twice, and that's not necessarily enough to disqualify it from the top 3, though I spoiler alert, both the Pokemon above it have won 3 different times. It's a little bit unfair to Landorus because it was like the top Pokemon in a couple different formats. It had a bigger target on its back, but let me explain why it's not higher up. What makes Landorus so good? It has some of the best stats of any Pokemon in the game. Tanky enough, not so fast, but like fast enough that you can, you know, give it a Choice Scarf and allow it speed stuff. Very, very, very strong. It also has one of the best abilities in the entire game, Intimidate. Those of us who watch this channel regularly know that Intimidate is very, very good, and it has an incredibly deep move pool. It gets the bug type move U-Turn, which does a little bit of damage and then lets the user switch out, except Landorus is so strong that actually with U-Turn it does a lot of damage. It also gets Knockoff to remove items and do good damage. It can use Superpower for a fighting type move. Rock Slide makes sense because it's a ground type, but still Earthquake and Stomping Tantrum for ground type moves. And a couple other more niche things as well. Like I won a regional with Choice Band Explosion Landorus Therian, which is cool. Also won a regional with it as a special attacker with like Earth Power, Sludge Bomb, Hidden Power, Ice U-Turn. Yeah, those are both true. I was using some weird Landorus sets, I guess. It also has a lot of different items it can run. Focus Sash has been popular at times. Choice Scarf raises its speed. Choice Band raises its damage. Assault Vest is really, really popular to make it tanky. More recently, we saw Clear Amulet Landorus take off. Life Orb Landorus has been used before, especially in Dynamax formats, Yachi Berry to reduce the damage from ice type moves, and a couple other ones that I'm probably forgetting as well. As a ground and flying type, Landorus is really nice synergy because flying type moves are not very effective on rock, steel, and electric type Pokemon, all of which ground hits for super effective. Ground moves don't work on grass, bug, and flying type Pokemon, and flying hits 2 of those for super effective and is neutral on the 3rd. So it's really, really good synergy, especially given that it gets rock moves, which hit the flying types for super effective. There's also Landorus Incarnate, who on the whole is a lot less popular, but did win the US National Championships in 2013. I recently used it to win a regional championship just a couple months ago at this point, and basically Landorus Incarnate feels a lot frailer because it doesn't have the Intimidate ability, which instead has Sheer Force or Sand Force, both of which boost its damage a fair bit. It's a really solid special attack and ground type, which is surprisingly hard to come by. Most ground type Pokemon are physical attackers, so having a strong special attacking one is a big deal. It's also faster than Landorus Therian, and it sits right above the base 100 mark, which like a lot of Pokemon are around. And so it's like a consistent special attacker. It's been used a little bit over the years, and at times has been good, but it's normally more of a niche pick. So why is Landorus not higher up than it? Well, there's a couple reasons. Part of the reason is that Pokemon above it are just ridiculous, like really, really, really ridiculous. Part of the reason also is that it's fallen off really hard. I actually made a whole video talking about this, but like Landorus can't really keep up anymore in the current format. A lower usage Pokemon than stuff like Clefairy, and a huge part of that is Incineroar. Landorus is an offensive Pokemon with the ability Intimidate, which is great, but when you have a defensive Pokemon like Incineroar with the ability Intimidate, which can weaken Landorus's moves and is better at using Intimidate, it makes it really hard for Landorus to keep up. It doesn't help that Rillaboom is a really popular Pokemon with the Grassy Surge ability, and Grassy Terrain cuts the damage of Earthquake in half. And another major weakness of Landorus is that it doesn't learn a good flying type move. It's gotten around this a little bit with Z moves, using like Z move based on fly, so you could have one really strong flying attack. Dynamax, which gave you 3 turns of max airstream, and then also Terastallization, you can just Terra Flying, Terra Blast, and that's all good and strong, except like it requires you to Terastallize, and so like that's a pretty big commitment for a Pokemon like Landorus, and yeah, it just like is having a lot of trouble keeping up. That being said, I'm sure it will be good in the future. It is a really strong Pokemon, and it was extremely dominant, but it doesn't have as many accomplishments as the Pokemon above it. Speaking of Pokemon that were once kings of the game and now have fallen off, let's talk about our number 2 slot, Thundurus. Thundurus is one of the best competitive Pokemon of all time, period. It is one of an extremely small group of Pokemon that have won the World Championships 3 different times. And to be clear, no Pokemon at the time I'm recording this has won more than 3 times. I expect that will change this year, whether it's Incineroar or another Pokemon that does it. But yeah, Thundurus is one of the only Pokemon that has won 3 separate times. And it has 2 Worlds runner-ups. One of those was me, actually. On top of that, Thundurus Incarnate has 9 national championship or international championship victories. Thundurus was so good that I think it is the single most nerfed Pokemon of all time, and I don't know what number 2 is. Like, I can't think of a Pokemon that has been weakened more than Thundurus. Thundurus was probably the main reason why the ability Prankster was changed to no longer affect Dark-type Pokemon. It's also part of the reason why Electric-type Pokemon can no longer be paralyzed. It's also the reason Thunderwave's accuracy was reduced from 100% to 90%. Speaking of Thunderwave, Thundurus got paralysis changed from cutting a Pokemon speed to a quarter of what it was to instead now being a half, a pretty major nerf to paralysis. Then there's Swagger, a move that it used to learn, which had the accuracy reduced from 90 to 85, which is only 5%, but makes a huge difference. And Confusion's chance of affecting was lowered from 50% to 33%. And Thunderbolt had its base power reduced by 5% as well. And frankly, I might have forgotten about a couple things. So what was Thundurus that it required Game Freak to do such drastic changes? Well, it was a menace. At its peak, Thundurus is one of the strongest support Pokemon of all time, which is funny because if you look at Thundurus's stats, it's very clearly intended to be a fast and strong special attacker. But the Prankster ability is just so good that, like, even though it was intended to be used as this offensive Pokemon, and for most of the first year after its introduction in Black and White, it was used that way. Once players figured out how broken it was to have a Pokemon like Thundurus that could move before all other Pokemon, things changed for the Electric Genie. If you trained Thundurus to be extremely tanky and gave it a defensive item like Leftovers or Citrus Berry, it could sit in the field for many, many turns. And that meant that there was nothing stopping it from just paralyzing all of your Pokemon, hitting them with Swagger, preventing them from using key moves with Taunt, maybe even doing good damage because Thundurus has such a high base special attack stat that even if you don't invest in it, it can still hit really hard. There's a couple really infamous matches where Thundurus just sticks in the field for too long and just paralyzes and confuses everything, and the opposing player just doesn't get to play the game. Thundurus dominated for the entirety of Generation 5, initially as an offensive Pokemon and then as a supporting Pokemon. The nerfs going into Generation 6 definitely made a difference, but it was still able to perform pretty well. It was still a really dangerous Pokemon and actually won the World Championships in 2015. But then Sun and Moon came around and Thundurus really didn't perform very well. And like, we were like, okay, I guess that's the end of Thundurus. Like, it got nerfed too hard. And then during the final year of Sword and Shield, it won the World Championships. But what's so interesting is it was used in a completely new way. Thundurus has a hidden ability, but normally you'd never use it because it's not better than Prankster under most circumstances. Its hidden ability is Defiant, which gives it an attack boost if it ever has any of its stats lowered. But Thundurus is a special attacker, so why would you want an attack boost? Well, Thundurus was actually a really strong Dynamax attacker. Because of how strong Max Airstream was, which raised the speed of your team, and the fact that if you ever lowered any of its stats, it just got a lot stronger, which was a big deal for a number of reasons, one of which many max moves lowered one of your stats, so it was a real deterrent there. And the combination of electric and flying just being a pretty solid offensive combination, Thundurus is a really strong Dynamax attacker, but it was able to bring out its full potential because it was often paired with Zacian, including the team that won the World Championships. Zacian hits extremely hard and starts at the battle with an attack boost, and so one of the main ways that players tried to deal with that was by using the ability Intimidate, coming off of Landorus or Incineroar to lower Zacian's attack, except you couldn't lower Zacian's attack without lowering Thundurus's attack as well. Basically, this put opponents in kind of this, I don't want to say prisoner's dilemma, but this like kind of lose-lose situation where either they didn't intimidate both Pokemon and Zacian was able to attack with its full +1 power, or they lowered Zacian's attack at the cost of giving Thundurus an attack boost as well. Thundurus could also use the move Superpower, and Superpower is a nice move because it hits some key threats, but also in Dynamax, it gives both itself and its partner an attack boost. So you could even get your Zacian to +2 attack if you found the opportunity for it. This was a completely new way of using Thundurus and is so different from the two other main sets we'd seen before, but it resulted in Thundurus's 3rd World Championship win. I do think that it would take a lot for physical Thundurus to make a reappearance, probably something like Dynamax or just Dynamax coming back in the future. But the fact that Thundurus was able to win the World Championships for a 3rd time, even after all the nerfs, is just absurd. In Scarlet and Violet, Thundurus is definitely struggling a bit, with the physical set no longer being viable and the power creep making its special attacking role a lot less impressive compared to a Pokemon like Fluttermane. It's really only left with the supporting option and with the anti-priority tools. And oh yeah, this is another nerf. They added Misty Terrain, which blocks all status moves, and Psychic Terrain, which blocks all priority moves. Those are both big nerfs. But yeah, with like the anti-priority from Pokemon like Frigoraph and Indeedee and Sarina, plus all the other nerfs that it's had, it's definitely struggling a bit. But I think to discount Thundurus' legacy and to pretend like it doesn't deserve to be this high up just because it's not good right now would be doing it a disservice. So all we're left with is the #1 best Generation 5 Pokemon. Most of you have probably figured out what it is by now, so I won't beat around the bush. The #1 best Pokemon in all of Generation 5 is Terra, Unova, Incineroar. Just kidding, it's Simisear, baby. Okay, for real, it's, you know what it is. It's Amoonguss. Among Us? Huh? Amoonguss looks a bit less impressive than the genies, right? I mean, it's just a little mushroom and these guys are like legendary Pokemon, right? But Amoonguss's results speak for itself. It's a 3-time world champion. Maybe at this point it's a 4-time world champion. It's totally possible this year. More impressive, however, is the fact that Amoonguss has top cut every single world championship, barring 2, since Amoonguss's introduction all the way back in Black and White in 2011. Between the two forms, Landorus has won 7 national or international championships and Thundurus has won 9. Amoonguss has won at least 12, including 2 of the 3 international championships this year. And the crazy thing is that Amoonguss has also been significantly nerfed, except unlike Thundurus, it didn't work. To be fair, Amoonguss hasn't been nerfed as much as Thundurus was, but some things that affected it are the fact that grass-type Pokemon are now immune to powder moves, so you can no longer spore them and you can't use Rage Powder to redirect their moves. They added the Safety Goggles item, probably specifically to deal with Amoonguss. They also added Electric Terrain and Misty Terrain to shut down Spore. They buffed the Overcoat ability to make it stronger to encourage more people to use it to, stop Amoonguss. And this isn't really a nerf, but Terra Grass is actually a pretty good tool to stop Amoonguss as well. That being said, it doesn't work. Amoonguss is one of the most threatening support Pokemon of all time, period. It's capable of disabling an entire team with its access to the very powerful move, Spore. Spore puts a Pokemon to sleep, which is not the only move that does that, but it is the only move that does that and never misses. Sleep Powder only hits 75% of the time. Grass Whistle, I think, is like 60. Sing is 55. Hypnosis is 60. These moves tend to be really inaccurate because they're so powerful. Spore is 100% accurate. It always works. And even if Amoonguss isn't using Spore, that doesn't mean that you can just ignore it. In fact, you might not be able to ignore it because it gets the move Rage Powder, which I mentioned earlier, and forces the opponent to target Amoonguss. Except Amoonguss is a lot bulkier than Volcarona, meaning it's even more annoying when it forces you to attack it, because if you don't have a strong attack or a super effective move, you're not going to be doing very much to it. And even if you're not affected by Spore or Rage Powder for whatever reason, that doesn't mean you can ignore Amoonguss. It can heal its partners with the move Pollen Puff, which will do damage if you target an enemy, but it will heal your partner for 50% if you target one of your own Pokemon. 50% of their maximum health, not their missing health. It's very, very strong. And let's say for whatever reason you're not worried about Pollen Puff. Well, a lot of the time, you still won't be able to ignore Amoonguss. It can use moves like Grass Knot, which do a ton of damage if the Pokemon is heavy, and a personal favorite move of mine, Sludge Bomb, which not only is pretty powerful, but also has a pretty good chance to poison. I mentioned that Amoonguss is difficult to get rid of because it's so bulky, but I didn't mention that its ability Regenerator heals it every single time it switches out. And it heals it by a lot, a third of its maximum health. And switching is something you often want to do anyway with Pokemon, so the fact that you get this huge passive benefit just for something that you often want to do anyway is ridiculous. Amoonguss has, at one point or another, been one of the top threats during every single generation, if not for a vast majority of that generation. I'm not even going to go through all the different formats Amoonguss was good in because it's basically all of them. And what I think is so indicative of Amoonguss's strength is that it's not a Pokemon you can kind of just wing it against. You not only need to have a plan to deal with it, but oftentimes if you didn't give yourself enough answers to Amoonguss when you were building your team, there's not going to be anything you can do. Amoonguss is a Pokemon that even when its usage isn't like so high, it still forces players to consider it because otherwise running into it can just mean that your whole team's taking a nap and there's nothing you can do. So even though it doesn't look as impressive as any of the genies, I think at a glance, I think that Amoonguss's legacy and the fact that even after the nerfs, all these years later, it is still keeping up and still terrorizing opponents. Amoonguss is so good. It was actually the MVP of my most recent tournament win, at least most recent at the time I'm recording this. Fingers crossed there's another one since then. Anyway, I think that even if it weren't currently doing well, it still has the results to justify being number one. And the fact that it still continues to be such a menace and such a powerful Pokemon, even nowadays, over 10 years after it was released, justifies its placement at number one. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. I feel good about this one. Sometimes these are really hard. This one I felt pretty confident about where I was putting the Pokemon, but if you disagree, that's totally fine. If you like this video, you'll probably like some of the other videos I did. I definitely recommend checking out the best Gen 4 Pokemon. That one was a lot of fun to make. There's a lot of classic Pokemon on there, and I'm sure that you'll like it.